Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of insights and distill them down to what truly matters for you. Today, we're plunging into a topic that honestly hits home for pretty much anyone who's ever tried to communicate in English as a second language. I'm talking about that frustrating, sometimes totally panic-inducing moment when your mind just goes completely blank. You know the feeling, right? You've prepared, you've rehearsed it all in your head. Maybe you even mumbled it quietly to yourself beforehand. But then the moment you open your mouth to actually speak, you're met with, well, absolutely nothing. It's that classic deer in headlights situation.
Yeah, it truly is. It's like your brain decides, you know what, perfect time for an unplanned vacation, precisely when you need it firing on all cylinders. That critical moment arrives and poof, everything just seems to evaporate, leaving you feeling utterly exposed and quite frankly, a bit helpless. And it's an incredibly common experience, far more so than many people probably realize.
Oh, I can certainly attest to that. I remember the very first, proper job interview I had in English. Oh, man, the nerves are just... They were absolutely through the roof. I had prepared meticulously. I'd gone over every possible question I could possibly think of. I even rehearsed my answers out loud, standing in front of the mirror, trying to nail every inflection, every little nuance of pronunciation. I felt ready. I really, really did. But then the interviewer asked me the very first question, something pretty basic about my experience, and my mind just went completely, utterly blank, like a sudden, unexpected whiteout in my head, a total data wipe. I just stared at him, I swear, like that deer caught in high beams, completely frozen. Couldn't even recall my own name for a second, let alone articulate a coherent answer about my professional background. The silence just stretched on, and oh my God, every single second felt like an absolute eternity.
Wow, yeah. That visceral moment of panic is just, it's so relatable. What did you manage to do? How did you recover in that super high pressure situation? Did you have a specific tactic ready, or did something just kind of click in the moment?
Well, for a split second, I genuinely did panic. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs, my palms were slick with sweat, and I felt this hot flush creeping up my neck. My mind was racing, but it was just racing in circles, totally blank, empty space. I could feel the embarrassment just rising. Then, almost without conscious thought, it was almost like an instinct, I managed to blurt out, "I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?" And you know what? That simple, almost automatic phrase, it bought me just a few precious seconds, just enough time for that initial fog of panic to clear a little bit, for a few words to sort of trickle back into my working memory. And I was able to gather my thoughts and actually, get through it. Not nearly as eloquently as I'd rehearsed, believe me. But man, it was nerve-wracking. Just thinking about it now, I can still feel a little bit of that anxiety bubbling up. But it also really highlighted how a tiny, simple tactic can be a surprising lifeline in those moments of crisis. It wasn't about knowing more English. It was about knowing how to manage the situation.
That's such a compelling story, and it perfectly illustrates the immediate physical and mental impact of that blank mind. It's not just a momentary lapse, is it? It truly feels like a total system shutdown, like an involuntary emergency brake has been pulled. I had a surprisingly similar and maybe a slightly more humorous experience when I first moved to Paris. I was in a small, very traditional bakery, the quintessential Parisian experience, right? The kind with that amazing warm, yeasty smell filling the air and displays just overflowing with delicious pastries. And I simply wanted to order a croissant, just one. A single croissant. Seems straightforward enough, doesn't it? A basic transaction.
Absolutely. That's like lesson one stuff, right?
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong ordering a croissant?
Exactly. My thoughts precisely. But when it was finally my turn to order, standing there at the counter, with this incredible display of golden flaked pastries right in front of me, surrounded by the murmur of rapid French all around, I just froze. My mind went completely, utterly blank. All the French I knew, all those phrases I diligently practiced gone, vanished into thin air. Like someone flipped a switch. I couldn't even remember the word for croissant in that moment of acute social pressure. The baker was waiting, quite patiently actually, and I could feel the line of people sort of building up behind me. So what did I do? In my moment of brilliance, I ended up just pointing vaguely at the display, trying to look as nonchalant as possible and stammering out, "Un de celles-là, s'il vous plaît," which basically just means one of those, please.
Oh no, just pointing.
Yep, just pointing. The baker, bless him, gave me the funniest look. It was this perfect mix of confusion, maybe a little amusement, and probably just a touch of pity. He definitely knew what I meant. I got my croissant. But the sheer absurdity of me, standing there unable to say the word croissant in a French bakery, well, it wasn't lost on either of us.
Huh. That's
Yeah.
absolutely priceless. It just goes to show, doesn't it? No matter how much you prepare, no matter how seemingly simple the situation might be, sometimes your brain just decides, nope, taking a break now.
And it's not just beginners who experience this, right? It happens even to people who are pretty familiar with language learning, people with years of practice under their belt. It really normalizes this incredibly frustrating phenomenon.
Precisely. And it underscores that while preparation is, of course, crucial, it's not always an impenetrable shield against this particular kind of brain freeze. It's a common human response, really. It's not some kind of personal failing in your language journey. So, okay, we've established we've all been there. We've shared our linguistic battle scars and the sheer panic of those moments. But today's deep dive isn't just about commiserating, though that's nice too. We're going to explore why this frustrating phenomenon happens. We'll dig into the underlying cognitive and psychological mechanisms behind it all. And maybe more importantly, we're going to share practical, really actionable tips and strategies, things that you, our listener, can immediately start using. The goal is to help you keep the conversation going. Stay cool and confident, even when your mind seems to momentarily check out.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to equip you with the tools to navigate these moments, to understand them better, first off, and then to confidently continue your journey in speaking English. We want to move you from feeling kind of helpless in those situations to feeling empowered. So if you've ever felt that frustrating brain freeze, keep listening because we've got some great insights and strategies coming up. We're going to help you navigate those challenges and hopefully speak English with greater fluidity and, well, less panic.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty then. First things first. Why? Why does our mind go blank like that, especially when we're trying to speak a foreign language like English? What's truly going on up there in our brains when we've just hit that wall?
Well, it's usually a pretty potent and often quite overwhelming combination of things. It's partly physiological responses and partly what we call cognitive overload. Let's break that down a bit. Think about what your brain is actually doing when you're speaking a language that isn't your native one. It's performing an immense amount of real-time processing. It's like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. It's simultaneously handling complex grammar rules, trying to recall the right vocabulary from your mental lexicon, which is, basically your brain's internal dictionary, storing all the words you know and how to use them. Plus, it's adjusting for precise pronunciation, trying to understand and maybe even mimic intonation, all while trying to construct a coherent sentence. And all of this is happening in milliseconds, usually under some kind of pressure, even if it's just the pressure of a normal conversation. It's a truly intricate and incredibly demanding mental juggle.
Wow, that sounds absolutely exhausting, just listing it all out. I can almost feel my brain overheating just imagining all those simultaneous processes running.
It truly is. And this is where the concept of working memory limitations really comes into play. Our working memory, you can think of it like a temporary workspace in our brain. It's where we hold and manipulate information right now. When you're speaking a foreign language, this workspace is already highly, highly taxed. You're trying to reprieve words, apply grammar rules, monitor your own speech, and comprehend what the other person is saying all at the exact same time. This creates an immense cognitive load. That's basically when your brain's processing capacity gets completely overwhelmed by too many simultaneous demands.
Right, like trying to run way too many demanding apps on an old computer.
Exactly like that. That's a perfect analogy. You try to open like 20 browser tabs, stream a 4K video, maybe edit a huge photo file, and suddenly the whole system lags, it crashes, or it just freezes solid. There's just too much demand on limited processing power, and something's inevitably going to give way. We call it the bottleneck effect sometimes because there are simply too many linguistic operations competing for the same limited cognitive resources. Your brain basically says, nope, too much, and stalls.
That analogy makes total sense. Or like trying to juggle too many balls at once. You start with one, then two, then three, and you feel okay, maybe even confident. But then someone throws in a fourth, a fifth, maybe a sixth ball, all at the same time. Inevitably, some of those balls, your thoughts, the words you desperately need, the grammar structures, they're just going to hit the ground. And let's be honest, the fear factor, the fear of making mistakes, that doesn't help either, does it? That relentless little internal voice whispering, don't mess up. What if you say something stupid? What if they judge your accent?
Precisely. You've hit on the other major component. That brings us to a deeply pervasive and often, I think, underestimated element: fear. Specifically, what psychologists sometimes call language anxiety. When you're intensely worried about saying the wrong thing or making a grammar error that feels huge or mispronouncing a critical word, That anxiety actually triggers a defensive response in your brain. This isn't just a feeling, it has a real biological basis. Your brain's amygdala, that's the part responsible for processing emotions, especially fear gets activated. It signals a fight or flight response. And when this happens, it can actually inhibit the activity in your prefrontal cortex. That's the crucial area of the brain responsible for higher level cognitive functions like planning, decision making, and critically here, language production and executive function.
Whoa, so it's literally a biological shutdown. The fear center of our brain actually puts the brakes on our ability to think and speak clearly.
Exactly that. It's almost like your brain, in a misguided attempt to protect you from the perceived social threat of embarrassment or failure from making a mistake, decides to just check out. It says, you know what, this is too stressful, too risky, I'm out of here. It's an ironic, almost self-sabotaging mechanism because this protective shutdown actually exacerbates the blank mind phenomena. It brings about the very thing you fear, the inability to communicate effectively. This psychological aspect is just crucial. Self-consciousness, this intense worry about performance, it can directly impede your linguistic abilities. And for language learners, this is particularly acute because you're often in that tricky transition phase. Moving from declarative knowledge, like knowing the grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, to procedural knowledge. Procedural knowledge is the automatic, almost effortless application of that knowledge in real-time conversation. When fear strikes, it severely disrupts that conversion process. It pulls you back to conscious, effortful, slow retrieval rather than allowing for fluid, automatic speech.
Okay, wow. So it's this really complex interplay, intense mental gymnastics, compounded by external pressure, maybe the importance of the situation, and then magnified by this internal fear, this anxiety, causing basically a total system halt. Understanding why it happens is definitely the first crucial step. It takes away some of the mystery, maybe some of the self-blame too. Now, let's talk about the how. How do we overcome this blank mind syndrome? What are the practical, actionable steps we can start taking, like today, to regain control and keep the conversation flowing?
Absolutely. Understanding the why is liberating, but the how is empowering. Let's move into those proactive strategies. One incredibly effective tip, and something you can prepare in advance, is to have some go-to phrases ready. Think of them as your conversational safety net, your linguistic first aid kit, if you will. If, or maybe when, your mind goes blank, you can rely on these pre-prepared phrases to keep the conversation moving, buy yourself some crucial thinking time, and smoothly regain your footing without resorting to just silence or visible panic.
Okay, I like that. Little conversational lifelines ready to deploy at a moment's notice, even when everything else seems to have vanished from your brain. Can you give us some specific examples? What might those phrases look like? Maybe grouped by what they help you do?
Certainly. Yeah, grouping them by function is helpful. For instance, you could have phrases specifically for buying time and processing, things like, let me think about that for a moment. Or, that's an interesting question. I just need a second to gather my thoughts. Simple, direct. Then you could have phrases for expressing uncertainty or needing to rephrase, like, I'm not quite sure how to say this exactly, but, or what I'm trying to get at is, or maybe, hang on, let me rephrase that. Or perhaps another way to put it would be, ooh, these aren't just filler words, you see. They are active, controlled pauses. They signal to the person you're talking to that you're still engaged, you're processing, rather than just silently freezing up, like my deer in headlights moment. They buy you those crucial seconds, sometimes even longer, to let your brain catch up, access that mental lexicon, and formulate a more coherent response. It actively shifts you from that passive freeze state to an active, controlled pause. And that projects confidence, even if internally you're scrambling a little bit.
That's such a useful framework. It gives you a whole menu of options, doesn't it? Not just one generic phrase you overuse. Let's try a practical example. Imagine you're in a professional meeting, right? And someone unexpectedly asks for your opinion on a really complex project, something you hadn't fully prepared for off the cuff. Instead of panicking and just staring blankly, which feels incredibly awkward and maybe even looks unprofessional, you could confidently say something like, that's a great question. It really makes me think. Let me just take a second to gather my thoughts on that specific aspect. It's not evasive, is it? It just gives you that moment to breathe, to quickly sift through what you know, maybe connect some ideas, and then formulate a coherent answer, even if it's just a starting point or maybe even a clarifying question back to them. It truly empowers you to manage that moment of panic proactively, keeping your composure and credibility intact.
Precisely. It's all about maintaining the flow and demonstrating your presence of mind, even when your internal processing is temporarily, let's say, buffering. And here's another powerful tip, perhaps one of the most foundational for building that automaticity we talked about. Practice speaking in low-pressure situations. The more you practice speaking English without that intense scrutiny, without that fear of judgment hanging over you, the more comfortable and confident you'll naturally become, and the less prone your brain will be to freezing up under the inevitable pressures of real-world conversation.
Okay, so low pressure. What does that really look like in practice? Does it literally mean just talking to myself in the shower? Or, I don't know, are there more structured ways to do this? Because honestly, talking to yourself can feel a bit silly sometimes, and I wonder how effective it truly is long term.
It absolutely can mean talking to yourself in the shower, or the car, or while cooking. And yes, it might feel a bit silly initially, I get that. But its effectiveness is really backed by the idea of desensitization and building what we call procedural fluency. So, concrete examples include things like talking to yourself in the mirror, narrating your daily activities aloud in English, or even chatting with a pet if you have one. They're very non judgmental listeners. For example, you might walk through your morning routine and say out loud, "Okay, I'm making breakfast now. I need to fry some eggs and definitely make coffee." Or, "Right, time to water the plants. They look a bit dry today." These seemingly mundane, totally low pressure situations help you get used to the physical act of articulating English words, forming sentences, thinking on your feet in English, but without the intense scrutiny or fear of judgment from another person. The goal here is really to reduce the cognitive load associated with the act of speaking itself. Making it more automatic frees up your working memory to focus on the message, the communication, rather than just the mechanics of getting words out. It's about building uninhibited fluency, making the act of speaking more automatic. You're literally building new, stronger neural pathways for spontaneous speech.
That's a great way to think about it, building confidence by removing the performance anxiety element. I can actually relate to this from my own learning journey. When I first started learning Italian years ago, I used to practice by narrating everything I was doing. Seriously, everything. I'd be walking around my apartment and I'd literally say things like, ora mi lavo I dentes, now I'm brushing my teeth, or vado al negozio a comprare il pane, I'm going to the store to buy some bread. It felt a bit silly at first, I won't lie. Almost like I was performing for this invisible audience of one. But it truly, truly helped me get used to forming sentences quickly and thinking directly in Italian. It built a kind of foundational fluency and really reduced that self-consciousness that would often trigger the blank mind when I was actually talking to people. It made the act of speaking itself less novel and therefore less intimidating.
That's a perfect example. And it vividly validates how these seemingly unconventional practices can be incredibly effective in desensitizing your brain to the act of speaking. It reduces self-consciousness and builds those crucial neural pathways for spontaneous speech production. And if you want to make this kind of practice even more fun and specifically target things like pronunciation, intonation, and the rhythm of English, you should definitely try shadowing exercises.
Shadowing. Okay, what exactly does that involve? It sounds a bit, I don't know, mysterious, like
Uh,
following someone.
Not quite like that. It's a technique that's championed by a lot of polyglots and language experts. Basically, this is where you listen to a native speaker. It could be from a podcast like this one, a YouTube video, a TV show, an audiobook, anything really. And then you repeat what they say as closely as possible and almost simultaneously. You're trying to speak right along with them or just a fraction of a second behind. It's literally like being their echo or their shadow. You're not just repeating words or sentences after a pause, like in a traditional listen and repeat exercise. You're actively trying to copy their pronunciation, their intonation patterns, the rise and fall of their voice, their rhythm, the way they link words together smoothly, the whole natural flow of their speech.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about the words themselves, but the actual music of the language, the cadence, the rhythm, how it all flows together. That's a really fascinating distinction.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
great way to put it. The
Yeah.
music of the language, or what linguists call prosody. Imagine you're watching an episode of your favorite TV show in English. Pick a character whose voice or accent you like, or find easy to follow. And as they speak their lines, try to mimic everything they say, almost in unison. Don't just parrot the words, actively try to feel and replicate the way they connect words, where they naturally pause, how their voice rises and falls, how they stress certain syllables or words for emphasis. This technique offers some really profound benefits. It obviously helps with pronunciation and getting your mouth muscles used to the sounds of English, but it also significantly improves your overall fluency because you're internalizing these natural speech patterns and the inherent rhythm of English. This direct mimicry helps build stronger neural pathways for automatic word retrieval and sentence formation. It makes it easier for your brain to produce language spontaneously without so much conscious effort. It really helps bridge that gap between understanding the language and actually producing it fluidly.
Oh, I've absolutely done that before, maybe without knowing the fancy name for it. I used to shadow characters from TV shows all the time to practice my English accent and intonation. I distinctly remember trying to mimic Joey from Friends, with his famous line, "How you doing?" Trying to get that exact inflection. It was actually a lot of fun, and it genuinely helped me improve my accent and intonation. It made the words feel like they were coming out more naturally, almost without thinking, as if I'd always spoken that way. It's definitely a dynamic and engaging way to practice. It moves beyond just rote repetition to truly internalizing the natural flow and sounds of English. It is like learning to dance by feeling the rhythm, not just memorizing the steps on paper.
That's an excellent example of applying the technique effectively. And it highlights how engaging with the language in a way that feels natural and enjoyable for you can make a huge difference in building that intuitive fluency. And speaking of practical tools for real-time communication, here's another absolutely essential tip, I think. Focus on the message, not necessarily the exact word.
Oh, this one feels particularly important because I think a lot of us, myself included sometimes, get stuck right here.
Yeah.
Paralyzed by the search for linguistic perfection.
We really do. It's such a common trap for language learners, and honestly, even native speakers sometimes. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to find the single perfect word, that elusive exact synonym that feels just right, that we completely lose sight of what we're actually trying to communicate in the first place. We're desperately searching our mental dictionary for the word refrigerator, and because we can't instantly find it, we just stop speaking. Or our mind blanks entirely under the pressure of the search. This requires a crucial mindset shift. Remember, the primary goal of communication most of the time is to effectively get your message across. Clarity and conveying your meaning almost always trumps lexical perfection, especially in spontaneous conversation or moments of pressure.
So, okay, if I forget the word refrigerator right in the middle of a sentence, I shouldn't just stand there silently internally kicking myself for the linguistic lapse.
Exactly. Please don't do that. Instead of freezing up because you can't instantly recall refrigerator, you could simply improvise. You could say something like, the large white appliance in the kitchen, the one that keeps food cold. Or if you're describing a microwave and the word just escapes you, you might say, the box that makes food hot really quickly. It might not be the single perfect, most concise word, but it absolutely gets the point across, doesn't it? You've improvised, you've paraphrased, you've used circumlocution, and most importantly, you've maintained the flow of communication. This demonstrates resourcefulness and a commitment to conveying your message, which is often far more valuable than absolute linguistic precision in many spontaneous contexts. It also reduces that internal pressure for perfection, which in turn reduces the likelihood of your brain seizing up in the first place.
That's a brilliant point, and it truly feels liberating. It frees you from the tyranny of needing the perfect word every single time. It reminds me of a time I was trying to describe a microwave in Spanish, actually. I couldn't remember the exact word for it at all. Microondas just completely vanished from my mind. Poof. I was racking my brain, getting flustered, and nothing. So I just described it functionally. I said, la caja que hace la comida caliente rápidamente. The box that makes the food hot quickly. The person I was talking to chuckled good-naturedly, and I laughed with them, but they completely understood what I meant. And the conversation just moved forward without a hitch. It really is all about improvising when necessary and prioritizing clarity over lexical perfection. It's about being understood, right? Not necessarily about being flawless.
That's a perfect real-world example of embracing improvisation. And it's something native speakers do all the time when they have one of those tip-of-the-tongue moments where the word is right there but just won't come out. And that brings us very nicely to another key tip, which is both physiological and psychological. Learn to consciously breathe and slow down. When your mind goes blank, the natural, almost universal tendency is to panic, to rush your thoughts, to try and push words out faster to fill the silence, or just generally get flustered. But consciously slowing down your pace, taking a deliberate pause, provides crucial time for your brain to catch up. And it dramatically reduces that internal pressure and the associated physiological stress response, the racing heart, the shallow breathing.
Okay, so it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Our gut instinct is usually to speed up and fill that awkward silence, but the actual solution is often to actively slow down. How does that work in practice, though? Especially when you feel the pressure of someone waiting for your response. Doesn't pausing make it worse?
It feels like it might, but usually it doesn't. It's really about taking control of your physiological response. For instance, let's say you're giving a presentation in English, and suddenly you lose your train of thought completely. Blank. Instead of allowing panic to escalate, simply pause. Stop talking for a second. Take a slow, deep breath. Really focus on feeling the air enter your lungs and then slowly release it. Allow yourself those few seconds of silence. It might feel like an eternity to you, but it often feels much shorter and perfectly natural to your audience. Then continue. This action does two things. First, it helps you feel more in control by calming your nervous system. Deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the fight or flight response. Second, it allows your working memory a moment to reset and process, making it easier to retrieve the information you need. And interestingly, your audience will likely perceive this pause not as a sign of struggle or incompetence, but actually as you being thoughtful and deliberate in your delivery. It can enhance your perceived competence, believe it or not. You're not in a race when you're communicating. So, taking your time to articulate your thoughts clearly often makes you sound much more confident and composed, not less. That's such a powerful and subtle way to shift control back to yourself. And here's a related tip, maybe a bit lighter, that can really help diffuse the tension, not just for you, but for your listener as well. Use humor. Use humor to diffuse the situation, if you can.
Yes. Oh, this is incredibly effective and often underutilized, I think. If you forget a word or stumble over a phrase or make a funny mistake, instead of getting embarrassed or internally cringing and shutting down, try to laugh it off or make a lighthearted comment about it. For example, if you mix up desert, the dry, sandy place,
Yeah.
and dessert, the sweet treat after a meal, which is a really common and often amusing one for English learners, you could quip something like, "Whoops, well, I guess I was craving sand instead of cake today."
Mhm.
Or, "My brain clearly thinks I need a vacation to the Sahara after that sentence." It instantly takes the pressure off both you and the listener. It shows that you're confident enough to handle mistakes with grace and a smile. It normalizes imperfection, demonstrates self-awareness and resilience. That's such good advice. It really promotes a healthier attitude towards making errors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Turning a potential moment of embarrassment into an opportunity for connection, maybe even a shared laugh. And honestly, most people, especially native speakers, will really appreciate your effort in speaking their language. They genuinely won't mind if you make a few mistakes. They get it. In fact, many native speakers are often quite impressed by anyone speaking a second language fluently, or even just trying. And they might even help you out by suggesting the word you're searching for, which transforms the interaction from something potentially judgmental into a collaborative, supportive exchange.
Exactly. This approach fosters a much more positive feedback loop. When you project confidence and openness about potential errors, you reduce your own internal anxiety, the very anxiety that often causes the blank mind in the first place. And you create a more forgiving, more relaxed environment for yourself to communicate in. And here's something else to remember, kind of a proactive mental strategy that you can use before you even open your mouth. Visualize success.
Ah, okay. Mental rehearsal. This sounds like something athletes do before a big game or competition. Does it really work for something as fluid and unpredictable as a conversation?
Yes, precisely. Visualization can be an incredibly powerful tool to help reduce that anticipatory anxiety, the worry you feel before the event, and significantly boost your confidence before you even start speaking. It's not about memorizing a script word for word because conversations are dynamic. It's more about priming your brain for a positive outcome, for feeling capable. Take a moment, especially before a potentially high stakes situation like a job interview or giving a presentation, or maybe even just an important meeting where you know you'll need to speak up. Close your eyes for a few seconds if you can, or just find a quiet moment to look away. And picture yourself confidently having that conversation or giving that presentation. Imagine yourself speaking fluently, engagingly. See yourself finding the words you need easily, articulating your points clearly, and feeling completely comfortable, calm, and self-assured. This kind of mental rehearsal actually trains your brain. It reduces the novelty and the associated fear of the actual event. Neurologically, it activates similar pathways in your brain that would be used during the actual act of speaking, making those pathways more accessible and less likely to freeze up when the real time comes. It's like preparing your mind and your neural circuitry for success beforehand.
Visualization, yeah, it's truly a powerful technique. It's like doing a dress rehearsal in your mind before the actual performance, building that mental muscle memory for confidence and reducing the element of surprise or shock when you're actually in the situation. And speaking of preparation and building foundations, we absolutely can't overlook one of the most fundamental long-term strategies for reducing those blank mind moments, systematically expanding your vocabulary. Sometimes, let's face it, our minds go blank, simply because we don't actually have the specific words we need readily available at our immediate disposal. It's a genuine lexical gap, not just a retrieval problem.
You've hit on a critical long-term solution there. It might seem obvious, but the broader and deeper your vocabulary reservoir is, the easier and more fluent it becomes to express yourself accurately and spontaneously. Just think about it. If you're learning business English, for example, and you have a rich, nuanced vocabulary, one that includes diverse ways to discuss things like profit margins, quarterly losses, strategic negotiations, emerging market trends, stakeholder engagement, and so on, you're far, far less likely to get stuck searching desperately for the right term in the middle of an important client call or a high-pressure board meeting. A broader vocabulary simply provides more options, more synonyms, more alternative ways to phrase an idea. This makes your brain's job significantly easier under pressure and dramatically reduces the chances of a word retrieval failure that could cascade into a full-blown blank mind moment.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense. Build a bigger toolkit. But how do we effectively build that robust vocabulary? Beyond just memorizing endless lists from a textbook, what are the best, most effective, maybe even surprising methods for lasting retention and, crucially, practical application in real speech?
Right, because rote memorization often doesn't translate well to active use. One of the most effective and, I think, organic ways is by reading regularly in English. And it doesn't have to be complicated academic texts or dense classic literature unless you enjoy that. Even reading a short news article online each day, or a blog post about a topic you find interesting, or maybe just a chapter from a relatively simple novel. Doing this consistently exposes you to new words and phrases naturally, in context. This is key because context helps you understand not just the dictionary definition, but the word's connotations, its typical usage, and how it fits grammatically within sentences. The real keys here are consistency, making it a regular habit, and engaging with authentic language materials that genuinely interest you. It's about passive acquisition gradually becoming active knowledge.
Okay, reading makes sense for exposure. But then how do you make those new words actually stick? It's one thing to see them and maybe look them up. It's quite another to actually recall and use them spontaneously when you're talking. I find words often they fade away if I don't actively do something with them.
That's a very common challenge, and that's where active engagement and specific learning techniques become really important. After you encounter a new word you want to learn, let's take negotiation. Again, don't just passively acknowledge it and move on. Make a conscious effort to use it. Try using it in sentences throughout the day, even if you're just practicing by talking to yourself, like we discussed earlier. You might say, I have a big negotiation with a new client tomorrow. I hope it goes smoothly. Or think, that last negotiation went surprisingly well. We secured a pretty good deal. Now, this active integration helps solidify the word in your mental lexicon. It strengthens the neural connections associated with that word, making it more readily available for real-world, spontaneous use. Another incredibly powerful method, especially for retention, is using spaced repetition systems, or SRS. These are often flashcard apps like Anki or Quizlet maybe. These apps use clever algorithms to show you words or phrases at increasing intervals, specifically timed just as you're likely about to forget them. This systematic review makes recall much more efficient and long-lasting compared to just cramming.
Right, SRS, I've heard of those. So it's like immediately putting the new tool into your mental toolkit and then having a system that routinely checks it for you, making sure it's still sharp and ready for use when you need it.
Exactly. It automates the review process in a very efficient way. And here's another vocabulary tip that I personally think can be a real game changer, both for memory and for practical application. Group your new words into themes. Instead of trying to memorize random disconnected words from a list, which can feel overwhelming and honestly not very useful, learn them in clusters or sets that relate to a specific topic, a situation, maybe even an emotion or a process. This approach taps into how our brains naturally store and retrieve information associatively. We remember things better when they're connected to other related things. Speaker.
Okay, so like focusing on a cooking theme one week, learning all those verbs and nouns, and then maybe a travel theme the next week, allowing the words to build on each other within a meaningful context. Precisely that. For example, one week, you could actively decide to learn words related to cooking. Maybe verbs like stir, boil, bake, chop, sauté, simmer, whisk, and nouns like ingredients, recipe, oven, stoves, pan. Then, throughout that week, you deliberately practice them.
Talk about your favorite recipes, describe what you cooked for dinner last night, maybe even narrate a cooking show you watched using the new vocabulary. The next week, you could switch focus to words related to travel. Luggage, boarding path, departure, destination, customs, itinerary, passport control, connection. Then you practice those by using them in sentences about a trip you've taken in the past or perhaps a trip you're planning for the future. This thematic approach makes vocabulary acquisition much more efficient, definitely more enjoyable, and immediately more applicable in natural conversation compared to just memorizing random, isolated words. You're building a contextual understanding, not just learning disparate dictionary entries. This also makes it much easier to recall related words in real-time situations centered around those themes, significantly reducing the chance of your mind going blank because you lack the relevant vocabulary for that specific topic.
That's brilliant. Themed vocabulary learning makes so much inherent sense. It helps you remember the words better because they're all related, right? Creating this kind of network of associated concepts in your mind. And I imagine you're also much more likely to actually use them together naturally in conversation because your brain has already practiced connecting them thematically. Plus, yeah, it just sounds much more engaging and less like homework.
Absolutely. You're essentially building a semantic web in your brain for different topics, making retrieval faster, more intuitive, and less effortful. And ultimately, the more words you have readily at your disposal, the richer your internal dictionary becomes, the less likely your mind will go blank simply because you can't find the needed word. It provides a deeper well of linguistic resources for your brain to draw from, making its job easier even when it's under pressure.
Exactly. It's about building a really robust foundation that can better withstand the inevitable pressures of real-time communication. So, to all our listeners out there, please don't worry too much if your mind goes blank sometimes when you're speaking English. As we've discussed quite a bit today, it happens to everyone. Even native speakers experience those frustrating tip-of-the-tongue moments or momentary mental freezes, even in their first language, let alone when navigating the huge complexities of a second or third language. It's a completely normal human response to pressure and cognitive load. It's definitely not a sign of failure or that you're not smart enough, but simply a sign that your brain is working incredibly hard.
That normalization is just so important, I agree. It helps alleviate some of that pressure for perfection, which, ironically, as we've seen, often contributes to the problem in the first place.
Mhm.
The really important thing is to keep practicing, try to stay positive about your progress, and actively use the tips and strategies we've shared today to keep moving forward. View these moments not as roadblocks, but maybe as little signposts, opportunities for growth and learning.
Yeah, I like that. Remember, speaking a new language truly is a journey, isn't it? It's not a sprint to some finish line, and it's certainly not a destination where you suddenly achieve flawless perfection overnight. And every single conversation you have, every attempt you make, every single time you push past that uncomfortable blank moment using one of these strategies,
Huh.
that is a step in the right direction. It's progress, even if it doesn't always feel like significant progress in that specific moment. Each time your brain encounters that freeze and you manage to recover, it learns, it becomes a little more resilient for next time.
So, maybe most importantly, be kind to yourself throughout this process. Please don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're not failures. In fact, they are absolutely essential, unavoidable parts of the learning process. Each mistake is actually a valuable data point. It helps you understand where your current knowledge gaps might be and where you could focus your practice next. Embrace them as a sign that you're trying, a sign that you're actively learning and pushing your boundaries.
Well said. With that, we're wrapping up today's deep dive into understanding and managing those frustrating blank mind moments when speaking English. We truly hope these insights and the practical tips we've discussed empower you the next time your brain decides it wants to take one of those unplanned vacations right when you need it most. It's a common challenge for sure, but as we've explored today, it's entirely manageable with the right mindset, the right approach, and yes, a little bit of consistent mindful practice.
So for you, our listener, as you reflect on today's deep dive, here's a thought to mull over. What's just one simple, genuinely low-pressure practice you could realistically start doing, maybe even today or tomorrow, to begin building your comfort and automaticity with speaking English? Or alternatively, what's just one go-to phrase from the ones we discuss, or maybe one you create yourself that you'll commit to remembering and practicing? Have it ready in your back pocket, ready to deploy the very next time your mind tries to take that unexpected, unplanned vacation. Think about it, just one small, actionable step can genuinely make a profound difference over time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to The Deep Dive. Keep practicing, stay confident, keep those safety nets handy, and remember, you've absolutely got this. Until next time.